Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to another edition of Biblical Lenses. I'm Pastor Chris Cousin, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about when the dog catches the car. This is a post about British Columbia, Alberta, and the collapse of certainty. There's an old saying about a dog that spends its life chasing cars, barking, sprinting, frothing with conviction, until one day, by sheer persistence, it actually catches the car. The obvious question then is, well, now what? Right? The chase made sense. However, the victory does not. What do you do now? That's where British Columbia stands today. After decades of chasing the ever elusive ideal of reconciliation, the BC Supreme Court finally caught their car. The August ruling granted the Cowichan tribes Aboriginal title over lands in Richmond, and at the time it was hailed as historic, as healing, and it was the just thing to do. Well, now as municipalities and homeowners and businesses scramble to understand what the ruling actually means, after all, ideas, rulings have consequences, a darker realization is perhaps dawning. This is not reconciliation, folks. This is straight up redefinition. And the result will not be harmony, I promise you. It won't be harmony. It will be havoc. So what we have here is a collapse of certainty. For the first time in Canadian history, a court has granted Aboriginal title over land already held in fee simple property that thousands have bought, sold, mortgaged, and developed under what was supposed to be the most secure legal system in the country. The city of Richmond, as we found out this week, is stunned. The province is appealing this ruling. Homeowners are asking whether their titles are now subject to someone else's claim. How would you like to receive that notice from the city of Richmond? Yeah, we don't know who owns your property. This ruling doesn't merely expand Indigenous rights, but what it does is it shakes the entire foundation of property law. It declares, in effect, that land ownership in British Columbia may not mean what you think it meant. And in an economy where real estate underwrites everything from municipal budgets to retirement savings, that's not a small ripple, folks. That's a tsunami caused by an earthquake. Property rights are the backbone of any functioning market, folks. Let me say that again. Property rights are the backbone of any functioning market. Undermine them, and the consequences spread far beyond one case or one province. Banks tighten lending, that's obvious. Investment flees uncertainty. Municipality lose confidence of their tax base. The small business owner and the young family, by the way, who obviously can least afford this kind of volatility, are left holding the bill. So, the dog that caught the car. The irony here is painful. For decades, politicians and judges alike have chased the dream of reconciliation through ever bolder legal innovation, and I call it what it is. It's innovation. Each ruling and policy was another sprint down the road, each declaration under another bark of moral satisfaction. But now that they've caught the car, now that the court has redefined ownership itself, they've no idea what to do with it. Justice without wisdom becomes chaos. What was intended as a moral victory may instead prove to be a social disaster. And that's where I see this heading. It is a moral, social disaster. You can't build reconciliation on a foundation of uncertainty any more than you can build a house on quicksand. You just can't do it. The dog has the bumper in its mouth. Yay, BC Supreme Court. Congratulations, you've gone all the way. The problem here is that the car is still moving. And I want to contrast this for a second with Alberta, because when I first heard about the ruling, I thought it's going to be problematic. And then with the city of Richmond this week fully admitting that this ruling is a serious problem, it led me down the path of thinking about the contrast between Alberta and BC. So, across the Rockies here in Alberta, we continue to be scolded for our own kind of instability. The very mention of provincial sovereignty or separation sends pundits into hysterics. I'm sure you've heard some of these for those that are paying attention. You will destroy investment. If Alberta separates, you're going to destroy investment. Even talking about separation is going to chase money out of the province. What else? You'll scare off business, obviously. Clearly, they haven't been here over the last number of years. Alberta is still sitting very, very well. The problem that I think that the very thing that they don't want to admit is that they're worried that separation or the threat of a sovereign Alberta is going to kill the golden goose. That's what we are, folks. We are the golden goose. And yet, let's look west. Let's do a comparison, shall we? Whatever one thinks of Alberta separatism, it remains for now a theoretical threat, right? As much as I would love to see it, it's a theoretical threat. It hasn't changed a single land title. It hasn't canceled a mortgage. Municipalities aren't freezing tax rolls. The BC Supreme Court, on the other hand, has done in one stroke what Alberta's loudest anti-separatists only talk about, that it has actually destabilized an entire province's economy. The same commentators who decry Alberta's supposed recklessness are silent now that the economic detonator has been pressed by a judge's pen. Why is that? Alberta's critics wring their hands about hypothetical instability. All the while, I think they're ignoring the real thing happening right next door. I've yet to read anything from the left-leaning outlets about the downstream effects of what has just happened. Maybe it's coming. I think by the time it comes, it'll be too little too late. The truth is this. If Alberta were to separate tomorrow, its economy would still rest on clear property law and stable ownership. Nothing in that regard would change. But British Columbia, even while remaining in Confederation, as far as I know, there's a small appetite for separation in BC, but it's nothing like here in Alberta. So even while they remain strongly Canadian, they remain strongly in favor of Confederation. They now live under the shadow of legal uncertainty. One is a threat to instability. Alberta is allegedly a threat to instability, but here we are. BC has become a reality. BC is the reality. And the reason for it is ideology on the Supreme Court bench. What drives such a ruling is not simply legal logic. I don't think it can be, but ideological zeal. Canada's judiciary has become a missionary arm of the new civil religion, namely woke moralism. The gospel it preaches is one of perpetual guilt. This is a gospel. This is their good news, by the way, that we are all colonizers. We're guilty of a variety of things. And with that requires endless confession, right? If you're guilty, you must confess. And by the way, we will never be forgiven, ever. Even for the things that we may have done wrong or should have done better, we will never be forgiven, right? You'll never pay the price. The law, once rooted in objective justice, is now a stage for moral theater. And that's what this is. It's moral theater, but we're in all kinds of trouble because this moral theater is going to play out in real life. And you know what's funny is Dr. Jordan Peterson warned us about this a number of years ago. You see, folks, this isn't about healing. It's about performance. It has nothing to do with healing and everything to do with performance. Courts and governments, you see, want to appear righteous. They want to appear righteous, even if it means tearing up the social contract. The irony, of course, is that they are now sawing off the very branch that they sit on. How they cannot see this, I don't know. I am of the opinion that they know perfectly well what they're doing and they don't care. A province cannot survive when its courts make ownership conditional upon moral fashion. And a nation cannot endure when its pursuit of justice destroys the predictability upon which justice depends. Do you understand? It's utterly moronic. And that's about the nicest thing I can say about it. It's utterly moronic. And there are economic consequences of this spiritual confusion. That's what it really is. It's spiritual confusion. In The Novelty of Nations and the Fragility of Freedom, a piece I wrote, that nations are fragile precisely because they rest on moral consensus, not merely legal code. You understand? Once a people forgets that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, ownership itself becomes an idol. The state, imagining itself sovereign, begins to redistribute what it never owned in the first place. And that's what's happening here. The courts have taken what belongs to God and decided that they can reassign it according to contemporary virtue. The result will not be reconciliation, but folks, it will be resentment. It will not bring peace, but paralysis. And that's the best case scenario, is paralysis. I believe it could go far, far worse. Every civilization depends on trust. That's if it wants to survive. You have to have trust in the law. You have to have trust in contracts. You have to have trust in your government. When you lose those things, when those things start to crumble, markets inevitably follow. The losing control in the piece that I wrote called Losing Control, anxiety is the inevitable result when man tries to play God. That's what happens. Anxiety. British Columbia is about to discover that no amount of judicial activism can legislate peace into existence. When you undermine the entire system, peace does not follow. So what we have here is freedom versus fragility. Alberta's supposed sin is its independence. British Columbia's sin is its guilt. Both stem from the same root, namely the rejection of divine sovereignty. Alberta, I do believe this is our sin. Alberta's sin is that we want freedom without obedience, right? We don't want to acknowledge God as the lawgiver. We need to return to that. BC, however, wants justice without the truth. And if both of these things persist, Canada will be left with neither freedom nor justice. Yet it must be said plainly, Alberta's rebellion, for all its bluster, and it is bluster, is the lesser of the two. I want you to please understand. I don't want any confusion here. I'm not saying Alberta shouldn't separate. After all, I am a separatist, right? Our rebellion here in Alberta is a refusal to acknowledge Christ as king. The separatist movement might rattle the markets. It might rattle the markets, maybe. But the BC Supreme Court just rewrote them. One threatens future stability, maybe. The other has already detonated it. They blew it up. We're told that Alberta separatism would destroy investor confidence. But no investor on earth fears political rhetoric as much as judicial unpredictability. You see, you can negotiate with a politician, but you cannot negotiate with a Supreme Court and the precedents that they set. So ask yourself a serious question. Would you want to go buy property anywhere in BC right now? I wouldn't. And what's especially interesting is I just got back a couple weeks ago from Fort St. John. Fort St. John is in northeastern British Columbia and falls under Treaty 8 territory. Treaty 8 territory is permanently ceded territory, right? Legally, permanently ceded territory. And yet, from what the folks up there tell me, is that the BC Supreme Court is treating Treaty 8 territory just like everywhere else. It's a real problem. It's a real concern. So what we have here is a foundation that's crumbling. Psalm 11 asks, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? That is where British Columbia finds itself. Property law is a foundation. The rule of law is a foundation. And without them, everything else, whether it be commerce, governance, or even basic trust, collapses. And it collapses chaotically, terribly, catastrophically is the word I'm looking for. It's not going to end well. Canada once prided itself on being rather boring, predictable, but we were safe. We were safe for capital, and maybe you wouldn't get a huge amount of investment, like investment capital dollars return in Canada, but it was always deemed safe. It was stable for families, consistent, relatively consistent in governance. That stability was a blessing built on a borrowed virtue, and you'll never believe what that virtue was borrowed on: a Christian worldview. Canada was founded upon a Christian worldview that understood that property was a stewardship issue, a stewardship created by God. It's all God's. God owns it all. Jesus is king of all of it, and we are simply stewards of it. We once understood that. We didn't understand this ownership apart from God, yet here we are today. We've obviously since forgotten that. And now, in the name of progress, we've caught the car of ideological justice, and now we've discovered, way too late, I believe, that it has no brakes. Now what? Well, I would ask for a call to wisdom. I would ask for a call to biblical wisdom. True justice begins with truth. Let me say that for those of you who are a little slow out there. True justice begins with truth. Reconciliation cannot be built by redefining ownership any more than peace can be achieved by rewriting reality. British Columbia doesn't need another round of moral theater. British Columbia needs moral clarity. That clarity begins where every renewal begins. Repentance. People of BC, people of Alberta, people of Canada, we need to repent. And the church, it starts with you. It starts with you. The acknowledgement that the earth is the Lord's, not ours, that the law is his servant, not our tool, and that freedom, stability, and justice all hang on that simple truth. Jesus is king. Until that confession returns, the courts will keep chasing their cars. The provinces will keep drifting apart, and the nation will keep pretending that it can survive without the God who made it. So, folks, the dog has caught the car, and believe it or not, now the whole country is going to be dragged behind it. This wonderful experiment of what they're doing in BC, if we're not careful, that will spread. Hopefully it stops at the Alberta border. However, until then,